Hi, thank you for joining us. My name is Natalie Lewis from Wyndham Brannon, and I have my colleague here.
Paul Zavitz.
We appreciate you joining us today. We're going to talk about incorporating open source intelligence into your fraud investigation or your fidelity claim. So, Paul, what is open source intelligence?
So publicly available information. You're not going to need a warrant. You're not going to need a subpoena to get this information. It's just available to anybody.
Okay, so am I getting on social media, stalking people? What is this?
You can, but if you're using it for appropriate purposes, it's not stalking.
Got it. So the way we think of it is you have information, you analyze the information, and you have business intelligence from that. So OSINT, which is what open source intelligence is commonly referred to as, has been around in reference since the mid-1990s. In 2001, NATO actually published its OSINT handbook, and then more recently, the CIA was credited with this quote here, which I love. They said, "Information does not have to be secret to be valuable."
I would argue, Natalie, that Google is a good place to start.
It is a good place to start. So if you're doing open source intelligence in your fidelity claim or your fraud investigation, what are some of the common sources that you would look at?
The internet, obviously, right? Government records, absolutely. Court databases. I have found in past experience, court databases are a wealth of knowledge. People don't realize that. Social media is huge, right? Everybody's on social media, at least one of them. So definitely get some good information off that.
So what are some of the information that you would acquire as you're looking on these sources?
Oh, so relationships, that's a big one, right? And I'm going to let you talk about our specific scenario, but the relationships that you can derive between people that you can glean off social media is huge, because you wouldn't necessarily find that anywhere else.
Absolutely. So Paul and I recently worked on a fidelity claim with one of the insurance carriers, and it was an interesting employee theft in which the employee was a salesperson. It was a natural stone and tile distributor based out of South Florida. And as customers would come into the showroom, they would be asked as to who referred them to that particular company. And that name for the referral would get recorded. And at the end of the month, they would look and say, okay, these people referred us X amount of business. We are going to cut them a check for third-party commissions. Well, over time, the company started recognizing that they had three particular companies that had large amounts of commissions that they were receiving. So they started digging into it and wanted to find out, who are these companies? We'd love to thank them for the business they've sent us. And lo and behold, the employee had been taking people that were coming in off the street. They were not actually referred, or maybe they were referred and she changed the name, but she had been putting in her boyfriend's company names. And he had three companies for which he was listed. And with open source intelligence, we were able to connect him and her through business filings with the Secretary of State, also social media, and then personnel records. She had listed him as her in case of emergency contact. And so with all of those combined, we were able to piece it all together and build our case as to how she was able to commit that theft.
It was really fascinating, and I think even in one of those cases, and this is a good reference to the slide up there, we were able to establish that one of the locations for one of those fraudulent businesses didn't even exist. It wasn't even a valid place. So just more proof that it was fraud.
And looking at different resources such as Google Images or Google Earth, you're able to not necessarily have boots on the ground to see that, but be able to confirm that it was an empty parking lot, or it was I think one of them was a UPS box store, things of that nature.
Yep.
So what information to look for, to search for, and what tools? There's so much out there, so how do you narrow it down? One of the helpful resources that we have found is the OSINT framework. And it's listed on the screen, and it's really helpful to have resources for global investigations involving individuals or companies in other countries, because this framework, you click on it and it expands for different areas for which you may want to acquire information, and gives you a list of resources for you to investigate. So what are the advantages of OSINT?
Well, it's free for the most part, right? But in some
That's always,
cases,
free's good.
free is always good. In some cases, you can pay. There are services where that will aggregate information that is publicly available, and I guess that makes it a little bit easier to read or easier to find. It's a time save. But I mean, for the most part, if you're willing to do the legwork yourself, most of it's free.
Good to know.
Yeah.
All right. So what are the disadvantages?
This is a good one. The biggest disadvantage is you're going to go down a rabbit hole. I do it all the time. I find something and I'm like, ooh, that's really interesting, and then I end up way off base, and it's just one of those things you just gotta kind of rein it back in, put some fences up. But yeah, you can easily go down rabbit holes, and then the other one is not everything's true, right?
Not everything on the internet is true.
Yeah, it's not.
Oh, it's kind of like the State Farm commercial, right?
That's right.
So just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. You do have to verify all the information, make sure that you can confirm, and if it's a .gov website, that's certainly more reliable than a .com, so keep that in mind as you're going through stuff. All right, so with this, one of the things we have to be concerned about is it legal? So what's your take on this?
Yes, it is legal, but you've got to be careful. You've got to be careful how you obtain it. You don't want to do anything sort of nefarious, or at least being perceived as nefarious, because if you're ever in court up on a stand, you don't want to look bad, but you also want to be able to explain coherently, concisely how you obtain this information and have it documented.
Great. So what are concerns to keep in mind with using open source intelligence? I would say first and foremost is privacy. You really could face liability issues for invasion of privacy if you use deceptive means, such as don't create a fake profile in order to search people out. Also, defamation. You want to avoid documenting or reporting information about subjects that you cannot verify through other sources. In addition, I would say that discrimination. You want to be careful when documenting or reporting information about an individual that potentially belongs to a protected class or a group of people that the government feels is vulnerable to discrimination. Also, evidence. Be sure to properly collect and maintain your evidence that you've gathered online, because you don't want to damage a case through spoliation. I would highly advise consulting legal counsel to determine the appropriate evidence collection procedures.
So what are some permissible uses, right? DPPA, Driver's Privacy Protection Act, federal law, Graham-Leach-Bliley. You're going to hear all these names of all these acts and laws that are in place that kind of govern the use of this information. It is important to be aware of those so that you know what is usable and what is not.
Good to know. So with publicly available information in databases, there are paid services as well as free services. And some of the paid services for information are subscription-based that you can get from companies such as the ones shown here. And these are just a sample of the companies that are out there. There's TransUnion, who has TLOXB. There's Thomson Reuters, who has Clear. LexisNexis has Risk Solutions, and then there's also Tracers. So really, the advantage of having a paid service is that it streamlines the process.
Right.
Certainly, you don't go down the rabbit hole as much. Right. And it reduces the hours and the fees spent by searching multiple databases and sources.
Right.
Now, I will say that with any of these, the data that is provided, while it's interesting to find out some information on people, be aware that you cannot use this information to establish a consumer's eligibility for credit, insurance, employment, any of those things. So what are the free sources, services for information? What is the advantage of doing this?
Well, it's free.
That's a good one.
For it. These are easily findable, right? You can pretty much just put in any search, and you're going to find some of these records. So that is one of the advantages of the free information. But then, like you said, the risk of going down rabbit holes or really verifying the information. You really have to go that extra step to verify the information from free sources.
Absolutely. So with some of these, as we mentioned, there's search engines, there's Google,
Hmm.
but it's always advisable to use multiple search engines. I don't know if you knew this, but Google has a certain algorithm to how the search results come up. So Yahoo or Bing, they may have a different algorithm.
Hmm.
So it's always helpful to search multiple ones just to see what results you get. And also, if you're really concerned about internet privacy, you could use DuckDuckGo.
There you go. Yeah.
So what about public records?
Oh yeah. So court records, like I mentioned that earlier. Those are great. You get a lot of information. I think Pacer. I think that's court records.
It is.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah. But there's a lot of other ones. Tax records I have found in the past are very very useful, and even really good for location mapping. A lot of jurisdictions use GIS data. And that can be very helpful, and it's usually associated with tax records. So you can really kind of glean together a lot of information and establish those relationships with some of these free services.
Great information. What about business filings and records?
Same. Edgar's great. It can be a little hard to read at times, but it's a wealth of knowledge.
It's not your go-to reading source at night?
No, only when I want to fall asleep. Secretary of State is wonderful. That's always a great resource to consult with. Zoom info, that's a good one. Corporate wiki. Again, you want to verify that information,
Absolutely.
but also, I mean, it's a great starting point.
I also like opencorporates.com. It's a global company search engine, which is helpful if you're dealing with international companies as well, and you can search by the company and the officer, so another resource there. There's also people searching. So yes, there's Facebook, there's LinkedIn. Tip, if you're using LinkedIn to search people, make sure you have your profile set up to private mode. You certainly don't want to tip off your subject that you have been checking them out. So just a item for future use.
Very helpful.
Then there's newspapers and articles, press releases.
Yep.
While up until a few years ago, I still got the paper newspapers at home delivered to my house. So much is now available online. And with newspapers.com, they actually have over 20,000 newspapers on their website from U.S. and beyond. And some of the papers date back all the way to the 1950s.
That's amazing.
So great resource there. What about images and maps?
Oh,
we
yeah.
talked earlier about a case that we used that for.
This is where I end up running down rabbit holes, right? So yeah, maps. It's great just to have that visual because you can read a lot of information, but when you have a visual, it really creates a clearer picture for you. So yeah, Google Maps, Google Images, Google Earth, and that's where I kind of get in trouble with Google Earth because I'm like, oh, that looks cool, and then but I digress.
It certainly tells a story when you
does.
have a business and they have an empty parking lot as their business address.
That's right.
So what are the do's and don'ts for effective searches? Really monitor your time. You don't want to go down those rabbit holes, as interesting as it may be, but then you don't want to invest so much time into a search and find out that you don't have anything to show for it. Also verify and corroborate evidence, and then capture that evidence as you find it, because you certainly don't want to find that you have lost it. The whole here today, gone tomorrow is not good for your case.
Yeah.
5-step process. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners has laid out that process. First, you would build the subject's profile. Step 2 is the internet search engines. Using multiple search engines is advisable. Step 3, search social media. 4, identify leads. And then 5, follow those leads. So that is our presentation today about incorporating open source intelligence into your fraud investigation or your Fidelity claim. We have certainly found that it's beneficial for our claims that we've helped handle.
It is, and it's actually kind of fun to do it too.
It
so,
is.
I mean, give it a shot.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.